If a painting could speak, what would it tell of tears hidden beneath layers of paint, or of a friendship the world has tried to erase? In a quiet room lit by soft yellow lights, there is a seemingly ordinary portrait, two women sitting side by side, smiling gently in a green garden. But beneath the layers of paint is another truth, dark, heartbreaking, and hauntingly beautiful. A restorer stumbles upon hidden words, blurred chains, and tears that have been buried for more than a century. From there, the past begins to rise, telling the story of two girls, one born in luxury, one born in chains, and a friendship that society will never allow to exist. And you, where are you hearing this story? In a small room on a late train ride, or in the quiet moments before bed? Wherever you are, let Sleepy History Tales transport you back to the American South, where a picture still whispers of friendship, guilt, and truth that never fades. It looked at first like a reunion, an ordinary 19th century portrait until someone looked closer. In May of 2024, inside the quiet conservation lab of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., Dr. Amanda Chen stared at the glowing image on her computer screen. For months, she had been studying American portraits painted after the Civil War, trying to understand how artists captured a country learning to breathe again. But this one felt different. Painted in 1879, it showed two young women, about 18 or 19, sitting side by side in a garden. One fair-skinned in a blue silk dress that caught the sunlight even through oil and varnish. The other, dark-skinned in a simple brown gown, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Their shoulders nearly touched. Both smiled softly, almost as if they shared a secret. That alone was unusual. Post-war paintings rarely portrayed black and white subjects in such equal, gentle closeness. The brass plate below read, "Margaret and Clara, 1879. A note from the Whitfield family of Charleston, South Carolina, accompanied it. Found in our grandmother's attic, 1956. Margaret Whitfield was our ancestor. The identity of Clara is unknown. The painting had been hidden away for decades. Hidden away." That phrase lingered in Amanda's mind like a whisper that refused to fade. So she began her work, slow, methodical, technical. Under the X-ray's cold light, the painting's layers revealed their secrets. When the image appeared, Amanda froze. Around the black woman's wrists and ankles, faint but unmistakable shapes of iron. Shackles carefully painted over, deliberately erased. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just a portrait, it was a cover-up. A deliberate rewriting of truth buried under paint. Why would someone paint shackles, then hide them? What was the real relationship between these two women? And why, after nearly 80 years, had the family kept it hidden? Amanda called Dr. Evelyn Washington, a historian who specialized in slavery-era artifacts. "I found something extraordinary," she said quietly. "A portrait of two friends, but beneath the paint, there are shackles." There was silence on the line. Then Evelyn's calm voice, "Send me everything. If there's a story here, we'll find it." 2 days later, Evelyn arrived carrying folders thick with yellowed documents. The painting hung before them, peaceful, deceivingly ordinary. "Show me," Evelyn said. Amanda brought up the X-ray images. Here around Clara's wrists and ankles. The artist painted iron shackles, then buried them under layers of color. Someone wanted them gone. Evelyn leaned close, her brow darkening. So originally, Clara was shown in chains beside Margaret. Then someone repainted the portrait to make them appear equal. Exactly, Amanda murmured. But why erase the chains instead of never painting them at all? Evelyn opened her folder. The Whitfields were wealthy plantation owners before the Civil War. Over 200 enslaved people. Margaret Whitfield was born in 1860. She would have been 19 in 1879. As for Clara, her name doesn't appear in the family records, but look here, Plantation Inventory, 1860. Girl child named Clara, born March 1860 to enslaved woman, Ruth. Assigned to house duties. Amanda's breath caught. Same birth year, same plantation. Evelyn nodded. Enslaved children were often paired with the master's children playmates when young companions' attendants as they grew. Equal in childhood divided by law. She paused. By 1879, Clara would have been legally free. But freedom didn't mean its quality. Many women like her stayed working for the families who once owned them. Amanda stared at the painting again, the smiles, the soft light, the buried truth beneath it. Two young women, one born to privilege, the other to bondage. By 1879, the chains were gone, but still there, hidden in pigment. What happened that year? Evelyn asked quietly. Why commission such a portrait then? Over the next week, the two women dug through records. Margaret's story was easy to trace, married in 1881, died in 1943. But Clara? Clara faded from the paper trail like smoke. A few city directories listed her as a domestic worker. No marriage, no grave, no mention after 1885. And so, a mystery deepened. A portrait painted in friendship or guilt. Two lives bound together by history, divided by silence. And beneath the layers of varnish, still waiting to be seen, the faint, ghostly outline of iron. 2 weeks passed before Amanda noticed something odd about the frame itself. Its wooden back had been resealed long ago. The nails rusted deep into the grain. When she pried it open gently, a thin envelope slid free, yellowed brittle with age. On its front, in looping script, June 1879. She unfolded it carefully. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. Dearest Clara, I know this is forbidden. My parents would be furious, but I cannot bear that we'll soon be separated forever. You are my oldest friend. Though the world insists we are unequal, my heart knows otherwise. Let this painting preserve our friendship with deepest effect. Amanda sat in silence, staring at the letter. They commissioned this in secret, she whispered. Margaret and Clara, against her family's wishes. Evelyn nodded slowly. To preserve what they shared, even when the world refused to see it. She paused, her voice tightening. But why the shackles? Why would an artist paint Clara in chains? That was the question neither could shake. Amanda turned back to the painting, searching every inch of the canvas. In the bark of a painted tree, barely visible beneath the varnish, she noticed tiny etched initials TWW 1879. Evelyn began her own search, combing through Charleston's historical records. Within hours, she found a name, Thomas W. Wright, a portrait painter whose studio once stood on King Street, active from 1872 to 1884. And there, in the 1870 census, a note beside his name, Mulatto, free person of color. Evelyn exhaled softly. This changes everything. She looked at Amanda. Wright wasn't just an artist, he was a man who understood both worlds. He knew what it meant for these two women to sit side by side. Amanda studied the X-rays again. So Wright painted the shackles deliberately as truth beneath illusion. Exactly, Evelyn replied. He painted reality underneath what society demanded to see. On the surface, friendship. Underneath, bondage unbroken by law. They dug deeper, finding an old advertisement from Wright's studio. T. Wright, portrait artist. All clients welcome. A quiet declaration in 19th century Charleston, a city not kind to artists of color. Then came a final clue. A small newspaper article dated August 1879. Local artist Thomas Wright has departed Charleston for Philadelphia, seeking greater opportunity in the North. Conditions have become untenable for Negro artists here. Amanda read it aloud, voice low. He left right after finishing this portrait. Not a coincidence, Evelyn murmured. He painted something dangerous. Margaret and Clara wanted remembrance, but Wright turned it into revelation. And soon after, he had to flee. Now a new question lingered like a shadow. Who had hidden this painting? And what exactly were they trying to bury? The answer they would soon learn was far more heartbreaking than either expected. Because this portrait wasn't merely a keepsake of friendship, it was evidence of a tragedy the Whitfield family had spent generations trying to erase. But history, as Amanda and Evelyn both knew, never truly disappears. It only waits. Evelyn began searching for Clara's own words, letters, diaries, anything that might give her a voice again. She reached out to the Avery Research Center in Charleston, an archive dedicated to African American history. A week later, a quiet voice on the phone said, "Dr. Washington, we found something." Marcus the archivist sounded breathless. A collection of letters written by formerly enslaved women, donated in the 1930s by a local church. Among them, several signed Clara, dated between 1877 and 1880. Evelyn flew to Charleston immediately. The letters were fragile, written in a careful looping hand on cheap paper, the kind that disintegrates if touched too long. One dated May 1879 was addressed to Margaret. "Dear Margaret, I received your message about the portrait. I don't know if this is wise. Your parents would be furious if they discovered we still meet in secret. But my heart leaps at the thought of sitting beside you once more, as we did as children. Before the world taught us we were meant to be separate. I will come. I will sit beside you one final time. Perhaps the painting will prove that what we felt was real, even if no one else understands. Your friend always, Clara." Evelyn's hands trembled as she finished reading. It confirmed what they already suspected: the portrait had been arranged in secret against every rule of that world. Then she turned to another letter written a few weeks later, July 1879, after the portrait was finished. This one darker. "Dear Margaret, I cannot see you anymore. Your father discovered our portrait. He came to where I work. He threatened me. Said if I ever approached you again, he would see me arrested or worse. I know you tried to protect me, but we were foolish to think the world would allow us to keep what we had." The ink trailed off near the end as though Clara's hand had trembled too hard to finish. Amanda looked up from the page. "He found out?" she whispered. Evelyn nodded. And whatever happened next, the family buried it. 2 women, 1 painting. and a silence that lasted a century and a half. And still beneath the surface of varnish and time, their story whispered, waiting to be heard again. The world will not allow it. Please do not try to find me. It will only bring more trouble. I must disappear for both our sakes. Remember me kindly. Clara. When Evelyn finished reading, she could barely breathe. Her chest felt heavy, as if the silence of a century had just spoken aloud. Richard Whitfield, Margaret's father, had found the portrait. And to protect the family's image, he'd threatened Clara, forcing her to vanish. But there was still one last letter. Undated. The handwriting shaky, the ink uneven, as though written by trembling hands. To whoever finds this, my name is Clara. I was born enslaved on the Whitfield plantation in 1860. Margaret Whitfield was my friend from childhood. We grew up together, played together, shared secrets. When slavery ended, I hoped things would be different. But freedom is not freedom when you are still bound by poverty, by laws that deny you rights, by people who see you as property, even without chains. Margaret tried to be my friend. She tried to preserve our bond through a portrait. But her father destroyed that dream. I left Charleston because I had no choice. I write this so someone will know that I existed, that my friendship with Margaret was real, that I was more than what they tried to make me. Clara. The room went quiet. Evelyn set the fragile letter down, her hands trembling. It wasn't just about a painting anymore. It was about two young women whose love and friendship had been crushed beneath the weight of a world that refused to see them as equals. When Amanda read the letters, she didn't speak for a long time. Finally, her voice came soft and low. The shackles in the painting, she said Wright painted them because Clara was still shackled by poverty, by Jim Crow, by men like Richard Whitfield who would threaten and intimidate to keep her silent. Evelyn nodded, and Margaret knew it. That's why she hid the painting after her father found out. She couldn't destroy it, but she couldn't show it either. It was all she had left of Clara. They both stared at the portrait. Two figures sitting side by side in sunlight, smiling through time. One free one, never truly free. But to understand what really happened, the day Richard Whitfield discovered the painting, Evelyn needed to dig deeper. She went to the South Carolina Historical Society, where the Whitfield family's letters and papers were kept. And there, hidden among his correspondence from the summer of 1879, she found a letter Richard had written to his wife Catherine. I have discovered something profoundly disturbing. Margaret has commissioned a portrait without our permission, showing herself sitting beside that Negro girl, Clara, who used to work here. They are positioned as equals. The artist, some mulatto from King Street, has created an abomination suggesting our daughter sees herself as equal to former slaves. I have dealt with the situation. I located Clara and made clear that any further contact will result in severe consequences. I have also ensured the artist has left Charleston. The portrait will be destroyed. Evelyn lowered the page slowly. The portrait will be destroyed, she whispered. But it hadn't been. Why not? The answer came from another voice, softer, hidden inside Catherine Whitfield's own diary, dated August 1879. Richard demands I destroy Margaret's portrait. He says it is disgraceful that it shows improper affection between our daughter and a Negro. But I cannot. I watched Margaret and Clara grow up together before the war, before the world changed. They were like sisters. The world says it was wrong, but they were children innocent of the divisions we adults created. Margaret has been heartbroken since Richard drove Clara away. This painting is all she has left. I cannot destroy it. I have hidden it in the attic instead. Perhaps someday, when these bitter times have passed, it can be understood for what it truly is, a testament to a friendship the world would not allow. Amanda exhaled slowly. So Catherine? She saved it. Yes, Evelyn said quietly. She was complicit in the system, benefited from it all her life. But even she couldn't destroy what her daughter's heart had once held sacred. They sat in silence for a moment, letting that realization sink in the contradiction, the humanity buried inside hypocrisy. Even within the family that upheld oppression, there was one faint flicker of mercy. Amanda's voice was barely a whisper. What happened to Margaret after Clara left? Evelyn already knew. She opened another file. Margaret married in 1881, a man her father chose. 3 children, a conventional life. But her granddaughter wrote a memoir published in 1965. She read aloud. Grandmother Margaret was a melancholy woman, often distant. She kept a locked drawer in her desk that no one was allowed to open. After she died, we found it contained letters from someone named Clara and a small portrait of them together. Mother ordered both burned, saying they were improper. I regret that we didn't preserve them. They seemed important to grandmother. Amanda's eyes softened. So she kept Clara's letters her whole life, she whispered. Locked away, hidden but cherished. Evelyn nodded. And the small portrait they mentioned, it must have been a copy of this one. For a long time, neither woman spoke. The lab around them hummed quietly, the air thick with the weight of the past. One painting, 2 girls, and a truth buried for nearly a century and a half. How many other stories, Amanda wondered, still sleep beneath layers of paint, waiting for someone brave enough to look closer. The family burned everything, but they didn't know that the original portrait still lay silently in the attic, shrouded in time and secrecy. The story gradually became clearer and more heartbreaking. 2 friends torn apart by racial prejudice, one threatened to disappear, the other forced to live a conventional life while their hearts were torn by a friendship. The world had taken away, but what happened to Clara after she left Charleston? That question still troubled Evelyn. Finding Clara after 1879 was nearly impossible. Her name disappeared from every Charleston record, perhaps because she wanted it that way. Richard Whitfield's threats drove Clara from the city forever. Evelyn contacted genealogists specializing in African American history throughout the South, hoping that if Clara had ever stopped somewhere, she might have left a trace, a church record, a census entry, a residence permit. After weeks of searching, a clue finally emerged. The 1880 census records for Augusta, Georgia, listed a 20-year-old unmarried black woman named Clara as a laundress. Nothing was certain, but the ages matched, and Augusta was close enough to Charleston for a fugitive to reach. Evelyn set out for Augusta. There, in the archives of Springfield Baptist Church, she found what she had been waiting for: a record listing Clara, a member since 1879, place of birth, Charleston, South Carolina. Next to it was a brief note from her 1880 church admission interview. I left Charleston to escape a dangerous situation. I want to start a new life here. Clara worked as a laundress for 6 years, lived in a boarding house for single colored women, attended church regularly, and actively supported the formerly enslaved. Then in 1885, the name appeared again in the marriage register: Clara, Samuel Carpenter, both residing in Augusta. For the first time, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. Clara had a new life, a home, a love, a beginning. Follow the census records in 1890. Clara and Samuel had 2 children. By 1900, they had 4. Samuel was still a carpenter and Clara was a laundress to supplement her income. A simple, enduring life. But then Evelyn came across a small item in the Augusta Chronicle in 1903. Clara, aged 43, died of pneumonia. Left her husband Samuel and 4 children. Known for her kindness and sobriety, the funeral was held at the Springfield Baptist Church. No mention of Charleston. Not a word about Margaret. All that remained was a modest obituary. Then Evelyn found another letter written in 1904 from Samuel himself to the church. My wife Clara rarely spoke of her childhood in Charleston. She said the memories were too painful. But before she died, she spoke of a childhood friend, a white girl named Margaret, who had been kind to her in an age when such kindness was rare. They had a portrait painted together, a reminder of their friendship before the world separated them. Clara never saw Margaret again, but she thought of her all her life. I am giving these letters to her in the hope that someday they will be meaningful to someone. These were the letters Evelyn had found at the Avery Research Center. Clara kept them until the end of her life, and Samuel, in his own quiet way, protected the relic until it could be read again. Clara lived a simple but strong life. She marries, has children, and smiles at her new life, but the wounds of that forbidden friendship never heal. Evelyn returns to Washington with the last clues in hand. Now, she has both halves of the story: Margaret, a woman forced to live a conventional life, keeping the memory of her black friend locked in a drawer, and Clara, a woman forced to leave her hometown, but still carrying in her heart the memory of a friendship the world rejected. Between them, a portrait quietly hidden in the attic remains as a witness to a rare moment when the 2 girls sat side by side, equal free, before the world could forbid it. As Amanda continues to analyze the painting using infrared technology, hidden layers are revealed, and the story, once thought closed, begins to reveal another layer of secrets. The shackles around Clara's wrists were more than just symbols. They were painted with incredible detail, as if Wright had seen them, held them, felt the heavy weight of cold iron on human skin. But then Amanda discovered something even stranger. Hidden deep under the layers of paint in the shadow of the painted garden behind the girls was a line of almost invisible words. She increased the contrast, adjusted the light, and then the words emerged. Though the shackles are hidden, they are still there. 1879. Wright had written the words under the paint, knowing that no one would see them, but the truth would remain embedded in the painting, like an indelible soul. Amanda also realized that Wright had originally painted tears in the corners of Clara's eyes. Then he covered them with a fake smile enough to make the portrait acceptable. In the X-ray light, the tears were still visible, sobbing silently. He painted the truth first, Amanda whispered to Evelyn. Clara sat next to Margaret, still in chains, still crying. Then he painted over it, creating the version that society could accept. The two girls smiled, but the truth lay beneath, never gone. It was heartbreaking and beautiful, Evelyn replied. Wright gave them the picture they wanted, but kept the reality they couldn't face. The two continued to research Thomas Wright. They discovered that he had settled in Philadelphia and painted until his death in 1891. An old obituary described him as a painter who portrayed the dignity of black people and the complexities of freedom after slavery. Now Evelyn and Amanda realized Wright was more than just a painter. He was a witness, a keeper of what could not be said. In many of his other paintings, hidden layers of paint may also contain buried truths, chains, tears, stolen gazes. The two decided to present their findings at a joint conference of art historians and scholars of African American history. The truth about these hidden chains could change the way the world views post-Civil War art. But first, they needed to do something more important. Find Clara's descendants. If Clara had 4 children in Augusta, her lineage would surely still be around today. Perhaps living ordinary lives unaware that in a faraway museum, their ancestors' story was being revealed. Evelyn asked genealogists in Augusta to trace Clara's last name after her marriage to Samuel based on the names of her children in the census records. The search took weeks, but then one afternoon, she got a call. "We found it," the researcher said. Clara's 4th-generation granddaughter is named Michelle. She lives in Atlanta, teaches high school history. I told her a little bit about the story, and she wants to meet you. A week later, Evelyn and Amanda flew to Atlanta carrying photos of the painting documents and original letters. Michelle, a woman in her 40s with the same gentle eyes as Clara in the painting, looked at the portrait for a long time. "That's my great-grandmother," she whispered. "I've heard she was enslaved in Charleston and then left very suddenly, but no one knows why." They showed her letters, documents, and even X-rays that showed the chains hidden under the paint. Michelle cried as she read Clara's words to Margaret, understanding that the grief was not just that of a woman, but of an era. She lost her best friend. Michelle choked. A friendship stolen by racial hatred. And she carried that loss for 43 years, until she died. Evelyn nodded. Yes, but she also lived, loved, and created a family. I am here today because she was strong enough to start over. Michelle was silent for a moment, then asked quietly, "What about Margaret's family? Do they have descendants?" "Yes," Amanda said. "The Whitfields are still in Charleston. We haven't contacted them because we wanted to talk to you first." Michelle looked them straight in the eye. "I want to meet them. I want them to know that Clara never forgot Margaret, that the friendship was real, and it meant something." Evelyn called the Whitfields, recounting the discovery. After some hesitation, a man agreed to meet them. David Whitfield, Margaret's 4th-generation grandson. The meeting was arranged at the Smithsonian, where the painting was being prepared for display along with the X-rays. David showed up looking a little confused, a tall blonde man with eyes that resembled Margaret's in the painting. Michelle was there, standing silently before the portrait, her eyes focused on her ancestor's face. David approached, looked at the painting, understanding for the first time that the canvas contained the sins of his ancestors. My family had donated this painting to the museum, he said slowly. We only know that it was hidden in the attic. No one knows the real story behind it. Michelle turned back, her voice calm but firm. Your family tried to erase that story. Your ancestor Richard Whitfield threatened my ancestor, forced her to leave Charleston, and destroyed their friendship. David bowed his head. I know, he replied softly. I read all the documents Dr. Washington sent. I'm ashamed of what he did. But Margaret, my great-grandmother, she tried to keep those letters. She kept them in a drawer all her life, never burned them. She kept the letters, Michelle said, her voice heavy. While my ancestors lost everything, lost their friends, lost their home, lost their childhood, and had to start over in a strange place with nothing. Between them, the painting stood silent as a witness. Heavy layers of old paint, hidden chains, and a friendship still breathing somewhere under the faded colors of time. The atmosphere in the room was heavy as lead. Evelyn stepped forward, trying to ease the rising tension. Because both women before her, though from two different worlds, were victims of the same thing, a society that did not allow them to be friends. Margaret, if she dared to defy her father, would be stripped of everything, including her family honor. As for Clara, she had no power to fight back. The real enemy was not them, but the prejudice that made their friendship impossible outside the canvas. The three stood silently before the painting. The light fell on the faces of the two women in the painting, Margaret and Clara, who were still smiling at each other as if time had never separated them. Under the paint, there were invisible chains, a truth that the world would never let them admit when they were alive. Finally, David spoke. I want to do something to make amends. My family has the means. We can create a scholarship in Clara's name. We can sponsor this exhibition. I want her story to be told alongside Margaret's. Michelle was silent for a moment, then said softly, Clara doesn't need pity. She just needs to be seen as a human being, with dignity, with the right to love and be friends without threats, without constraints. David nodded. I understand. I can't change the past. I can only help tell it as honestly, as completely as possible. They tried to keep that friendship in this painting, and I can help the world hear that story. Michelle let out a soft breath. Okay, but tell it all. Hide nothing. Not the chains, the losses, the pain. David said, absolutely. In the months that followed, they planned the exhibition together. Michelle brought photos of Clara's descendants' letters and papers from her life in Augusta. David brought Catherine Whitfield's diaries documents about Margaret and copies of family records. The exhibition was called Hidden Chains, a Friendship That Survived on Canvas. It told the story of two girls who grew up in a divided world, one a slave owner, one a slave, and a painting that hid what history dared not tell. Before the opening, Michelle and David stood together in front of the painting. They looked so happy, Michelle whispered. In that moment, David replied, they were themselves two friends, nothing more, nothing less. Michelle looked at it for a long time, then said, I hope they know that after 145 years, their descendants are standing here together, telling the story the world tried to forget On opening day, the Smithsonian was packed. Historians, journalists, slave descendants. Visitors all stood silently before the painting. In the middle was the original, illuminated by a thin strip of light. On the left was an X-ray showing the shackles around Clara's wrists, the tear that Wright had painted over with a fresh coat of paint. On the right, the finished version, the two women sitting side by side, calm, smiling. A small plaque below read, "In 1879, two young women who grew up on a South Carolina plantation, one a master's daughter, the other, once considered property, secretly commissioned this portrait to document a friendship the world would not accept. Their names were Margaret Whitfield and Clara, both 19 years old, 14 years after the end of slavery. They wanted the painting to prove that their friendship was real, even though society forced them to live apart. The artist, Thomas Wright, a free black man, did what no one else dared. He painted the truth. He painted Clara in chains and tears, a symbol of a freedom that was never complete. Then he applied another layer of paint, creating a peaceful scene that the two girls could openly keep. But under that layer of paint, the truth remained. Forever. Viewers walked slowly through each letter, each note. They read about Richard Whitfield's threats, about Clara's years in Augusta, about Margaret's life after losing her friend, letters locked then burned. Another corner told of Thomas Wright, his journey from the South, his life and death in Philadelphia, and other paintings whose paint also hid untold stories. The last room made everyone pause longer. Two enlarged photos, Michelle and David, standing in front of the painting. Below are two passages of foreword. Michelle writes, "My great-grandmother Clara survived slavery, poverty, separation, and threats. She raised 4 children, leaving us a legacy of resilience. I teach history because she believed that truth can heal." This painting was nearly forgotten, like so many other stories of women of color. But Clara survived in letters, in paintings, in the memories of her children and grandchildren. David writes, "My great-grandmother Margaret tried to hold on to a friendship that society would not allow. She failed, but she never forgot. She kept Clara's letters for 60 years, afraid to share them, but also unable to burn them. Her story is complicated, painful, but it needs to be told, so that we understand that racism destroys everyone, even those who seem to benefit from it." The exhibition became one of the Smithsonian's most visited events. Journalists called it a dialogue between past and present, and scholars began to unpack each of Thomas Wright's other paintings and uncover other truths still waiting to be seen. The story of Margaret and Clara quickly spread, sparking conversations about childhood friendships between children of different races, about how the end of slavery did not mean the end of its trauma, about the complex relationships, both tender and binding, between white and black women in the post-war American South. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Michelle received a package in the mail at her home in Atlanta. Inside was a letter written in shaky but proud handwriting. "Dear Michelle, my name is Patricia and I am 92 years old. I am Clara's youngest child. That is your great-grandmother. I am still alive. I saw the news about the exhibition and wanted you to know I still miss you. When I was 3 years old, my mother showed me a small drawing hidden very carefully. In it was my mother and another girl sitting together smiling. My mother said, 'This is my friend Margaret. The world says we can't be friends, but we are friends. Remember, the world is often wrong about who is worthy of love.' I have kept that drawing for 89 years. Now I am giving it back to you. It belongs to the other painting." Michelle opened the package with trembling hands. Between the old tissue paper and the paper was a small yellowed pencil sketch. The two girls, 7 or 8, held hands and smiled. Below scrawled text read, "Margaret and Clara, 1867. The sketch done by them had been made 12 years before the official portrait, when their friendship was still pure, unspoiled by the world's prejudices. Michelle immediately contacted Amanda and Evelyn. The sketch was added to the exhibition, placed in a glass case next to Patricia's letter, as living proof that even a 3-year-old understood her mother's lesson, that friendship, if sincere, can transcend the boundaries of fear. Michelle then traveled to Charleston to meet Patricia. The elderly woman burst into tears when she saw the photos of her children and grandchildren, 4 generations she had never met. All were doing well, all carried on Clara's legacy. "Your mother would be proud," Patricia whispered. "My mother always said that education was everything. You had to learn, you had to move forward, and you had to never let anyone make you feel inferior." Michelle smiled. It started in her childhood. It was Margaret who taught her to read before they were discovered and punished. Patricia nodded. "My mother never forgot her friend. Even in her final days, she still mentioned Margaret. She said, 'There are friendships so real that even the cruelty of the world cannot destroy them.'" The exhibition was extended for a year because of unprecedented visitor numbers. Schools brought their students to visit, retelling the story to teach about the legacy of slavery, about human resilience, and about the ability to connect beyond false boundaries. Michelle and David, descendants of those 2 women, also became friends. A friendship born from the ruins of the past, now sustained by respect and understanding. They gave speeches, wrote articles, and called for teaching history honestly, without embellishment or evasion. 5 years later, Michelle published Hidden Chains, my great-grandmother's story and the friendship that survived in paint. In the final chapter, she writes, "I teach my students that history is not just a series of dates, but people relationships, loves, losses, and survival." Margaret and Clara loved each other before the world taught them that it was wrong. They tried to keep that friendship together with a painting, but racism was stronger. Clara lost her friend, her home, her everything. But she did not let the loss destroy her. She rebuilt her life, raised her children, and passed this story down to me, 5 generations later. The chains Wright painted are not just symbols of the past, but of barriers that still exist in many other forms. But Clara's strength and perseverance, that is what lives on in me, in my students, in anyone who hears this story and refuses to let it be forgotten. The original portrait remains at the Smithsonian with the X-ray on permanent display beside it. Visitors from all over the world come to see it, to see the 2 women smiling together, and to see the chains hidden beneath the paint, where Thomas Wright hid the truth for 145 years. In Atlanta, Michelle keeps the small pencil sketch in her study. She often shows it to her students. "See?" she says softly, pointing to the shaky lines on the paper. These 2 girls held hands, drew together before the world taught them that it was wrong. Margaret commissioned the painting. Clara kept the letters. Wright drew the truth underneath. And now, nearly 2 centuries later, we know they existed. They mattered. Their friendship was real. She pauses, her gaze still. Those chains were hidden, she said softly. But so was love, so was resistance, and the truth always found a way to survive. Though covered by layers, painted, though hidden in the attic, though power tries to erase it, the truth still exists. And so do we.